Picture this. You've spent 3 years building the digital backbone that makes your company worth $47 million. You've worked weekends, missed family dinners, and sacrificed sleep to create integration systems so sophisticated that a Fortune 500 company wants to acquire your entire organization just to get their hands on your work. The acquisition team is arriving in 3 hours for the final technical demonstration that will seal the deal. And that's when your manager walks into the conference room and fires you. He thought he was getting rid of a problem employee. What he actually did was pull the plug on the very systems that justified the biggest payday in company history. Because here's what David Miller never bothered to learn about the woman sitting in cubicle 42. I wasn't just another engineer. I was the engineer. And I had built something he couldn't see, couldn't understand, and definitely couldn't replace. My name is Sarah Chen, and this is the story of how being fired on acquisition day became the best thing that ever happened to my career. But first, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 years earlier, I had walked into TechFlow Solutions as a senior systems analyst with a computer science degree from UC Berkeley, and 8 years of experience making incompatible software platforms talk to each other like old friends. Integration work isn't glamorous. It's the behind-the-scenes magic that lets your CRM system share data with your email marketing platform or allows your inventory management software to automatically update your accounting records. Most people don't even know it exists until it breaks. TechFlow specialized in customer relationship management for mid-sized businesses, the kind of companies that had outgrown basic solutions but weren't ready for enterprise-level complexity. Our software was solid, reliable, and reasonably priced. What made us special wasn't our core product, though. What made us special was that our system could integrate seamlessly with practically anything our clients were already using. That seamless integration was my domain. When I joined TechFlow, their integration capabilities were basic at best. They could connect to maybe a dozen popular platforms, and even those connections required manual configuration that often took weeks to implement. I saw the potential immediately. These businesses didn't want to replace their entire technology stack just to get better customer management. They wanted their new CRM to work with their existing tools. I could make that happen. My first project was connecting our system to Salesforce. The previous integration attempts had been clunky, unreliable, and required constant maintenance. I rebuilt it from the ground up using modern API architecture and intelligent error handling. Instead of breaking every time Salesforce updated their system, my integration adapted automatically. Instead of requiring manual data mapping for each client, I created dynamic field matching that could figure out the connections on its own. The results were immediate. Our sales team started closing deals they had been losing to competitors. Client satisfaction scores jumped. Support tickets for integration issues dropped by 70%. Within 6 months, I had expanded our integration library to include HubSpot, Microsoft Dynamics, MailChimp, QuickBooks, and 15 other platforms that our clients actually used. But I wasn't just connecting systems, I was creating something bigger. Each integration I built was designed with a unified architecture that made adding new platforms exponentially easier. Instead of building separate bridges between our system and each external platform, I was constructing a central hub that could adapt to any properly designed API. It was elegant, scalable, and completely invisible to anyone who didn't understand system architecture. My manager at the time, Linda Rodriguez, understood what I was building. She had been with TechFlow since the early days and knew that our integration capabilities were becoming our primary competitive advantage. She gave me the resources I needed, protected my time from meaningless meetings, and made sure I got credit for the revenue growth that my work was generating. Linda retired 18 months ago. That's when David Miller arrived. David came from a larger tech company where he had held the title of Senior Project Manager. He had an MBA from a respectable business school and spoke fluent corporate buzzword. His interview presentation focused on maximizing stakeholder value through strategic operational optimization. He talked about leveraging core competencies and implementing best practices frameworks. He had never written a line of code in his life. The executives loved him. Here was someone who could translate technical work into business language, who understood profit margins and quarterly targets, who could interface effectively with potential investors or acquisition partners. They promoted him to engineering director and put him in charge of the technical team that I had been leading informally for over a year. David's first initiative was implementing what he called development standardization protocols. He wanted detailed documentation for every system, standardized coding practices across all projects, and regular progress reports that could be easily understood by non-technical stakeholders. On the surface, these seemed like reasonable management practices. In reality, they represented a fundamental misunderstanding of how complex integration work actually functions. Integration development isn't like building a website or creating a mobile app. Every platform you're connecting to has its own quirks, its own authentication requirements, its own data formats and rate limits. What works for connecting to Salesforce might be completely inappropriate for connecting to QuickBooks. The elegant solutions come from understanding these unique characteristics and designing flexible architectures that can adapt to them. David wanted everything standardized because standardization looked professional in PowerPoint presentations. I tried to explain why cookie-cutter approaches would make our integrations less reliable and harder to maintain. He nodded during my explanations and then asked me to create templates that other developers could follow to replicate my work. The templates were useless, of course. You can't template expertise. You can't create a step-by-step guide for solving problems that haven't been discovered yet. Integration work requires deep understanding of how different systems handle data, authentication, error conditions, and edge cases. It requires the ability to think through complex interactions and anticipate failure modes. Most importantly, it requires the experience to know when to break the rules. But David was convinced that any process that couldn't be documented and replicated was inefficient. He started pushing for what he called knowledge democratization, which meant that I needed to train other developers to take over portions of my work. The goal, he explained, was to reduce the company's dependence on any single individual. I understood what was really happening. David was threatened by having a technical expert on his team who understood systems that he couldn't even discuss intelligently. He wanted to dilute my expertise, break down my complex work into simple tasks that could be distributed among junior developers, and position himself as the strategic mastermind who had optimized our development process. I trained Marcus Webb, a recent computer science graduate who had joined our team 6 months earlier. Marcus was smart, eager to learn, and technically competent within his areas of experience. But integration architecture isn't something you can learn in a few training sessions. It requires years of encountering different platforms, debugging connection failures, and developing an intuitive understanding of how data flows between systems. I also worked with Rachel Kim, a developer who had been with TechFlow for 18 months and had shown genuine aptitude for complex problem-solving. Rachel understood the concepts quickly and asked intelligent questions. If I had been given time to properly mentor her, she could have eventually taken on significant integration projects. But David wanted immediate results, not long-term development. The pressure to democratize knowledge intensified as TechFlow began attracting attention from potential acquirers. Our integration capabilities had become so sophisticated that we were handling implementations that enterprise-level platforms struggled with. We could connect a mid-sized manufacturer's custom inventory system to their accounting software, their shipping platform, their customer portal, and their supplier networks in ways that maintained real-time synchronization across all platforms. Companies that tried to replicate this level of integration with other solutions ended up with brittle, maintenance-heavy implementations that broke constantly. Word started spreading through the industry. TechFlow wasn't just another CRM provider anymore. We were the company that could make any technology stack work together seamlessly. That capability was worth far more than our customer base or our core software. It was worth $47 million to DataCorp, a Fortune 500 technology conglomerate that specialized in enterprise integration solutions. The acquisition discussions began 8 months ago. DataCorp's technical team spent weeks evaluating our integration architecture, testing our APIs, and analyzing the sophistication of our implementations. They weren't buying TechFlow's customer relationship management software. They were buying the integration platform that I had built. During the technical due diligence process, I spent countless hours on video calls with DataCorp's architects, walking them through our system design, explaining the elegant solutions I had developed for common integration challenges, and demonstrating the scalability of our platform. Patricia Wong, Datacorp's Chief Technology Officer, told me that our integration capabilities were unlike anything she had seen in the mid-market space. The acquisition negotiations stretched on for months. Legal teams reviewed contracts, financial analysts evaluated revenue projections, and executives debated strategic synergies. Throughout this process, I continued building and refining our integration platform. I added support for new platforms that our clients were requesting. I optimized performance for high-volume data synchronization. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I developed new security protocols that would meet Datacorp's enterprise-level requirements. Most importantly, I built what I privately called continuity verification protocols into every system I created. These weren't malicious backdoors or hidden kill switches. They were legitimate security measures designed to prevent unauthorized access to critical systems. Every 72 hours, my integration platform would verify that the original architect was still actively engaged with the company and authorized to maintain administrative access to the systems. This wasn't paranoia, it was professional prudence. Integration platforms handle sensitive data flows between multiple systems. If my credentials were ever compromised, if I was suddenly incapacitated, or if someone tried to gain unauthorized administrative access to systems they didn't understand, the continuity verification protocols would activate enhanced security measures until the situation could be properly resolved. The protocols were invisible during normal operations. They didn't interfere with client integrations or routine maintenance tasks. They only activated when someone attempted to perform high-level administrative functions or stress testing procedures without proper authorization. In those situations, the systems would require additional authentication that could only be provided by the original architect. I had learned to build these safeguards early in my career, after watching too many companies suffer catastrophic system failures when non-technical managers tried to demonstrate systems they didn't understand to impress clients or investors. The continuity verification protocols were my insurance policy against corporate incompetence. As the acquisition moved toward its final stages, David became increasingly focused on positioning himself as the technical leader who would interface with Datacorp after the acquisition closed. He started attending meetings that had previously been my responsibility. He inserted himself into technical discussions where his contributions were limited to restating my explanations in business terminology. He began referring to our integration platform as the system we've built, rather than acknowledging the individual expertise that had created it. I watched this happening with a mixture of amusement and concern. David genuinely seemed to believe that managing a technical team was the same as understanding the technology. He had convinced himself that his strategic oversight and process optimization had been the key factors in creating our integration capabilities. In his mind, I was simply the implementation specialist who had executed his vision. The final acquisition agreement was signed on a Friday afternoon in late September. Datacorp would pay $47 million for TechFlow, with the deal closing pending a successful technical audit that would take place the following Tuesday. The technical audit was designed to verify that our integration platform could perform as promised under the stress conditions that Datacorp's enterprise clients would require. I had been preparing for this audit for weeks. Every integration had been optimized for peak performance. Every potential failure point had been identified and reinforced. Every demonstration scenario had been tested and refined. The audit would involve connecting our platform to Datacorp's test environment and demonstrating real-time data synchronization between multiple enterprise platforms under high-volume conditions. This was my moment. 3 years of work, countless late nights, and dozens of elegant solutions to complex technical challenges would finally be recognized at their true value. The audit would prove that TechFlow's integration platform was worth every dollar of Datacorp's investment. On Monday morning, the day before the audit, I arrived early to run final performance tests and make sure every system was operating at optimal levels. The champagne was already chilling in the break room refrigerator. The executives were nervous but excited. The technical team was confident and ready. I had no idea that in less than 4 hours David Miller would walk into conference room B and destroy everything I had built. But maybe I should have seen it coming. Because David had spent 18 months trying to prove that he was more valuable to TechFlow than the woman who had actually created their most valuable asset. And what better way to prove his importance than to demonstrate that the company could function perfectly well without me? He was about to discover how wrong he was. The call came at exactly 11:47 a.m. I was reviewing the final checklist for tomorrow's technical audit when Jessica Martinez from Human Resources appeared on my desk phone display. Her voice carried that artificially cheerful tone that HR professionals perfect when they're about to deliver devastating news. "Sarah, could you step into conference room B for a moment? There's something we need to discuss with you." Conference room B was the smallest meeting space on our floor, windowless and cramped, typically reserved for disciplinary conversations and termination meetings. My stomach dropped, but I told myself this had to be about something routine. Perhaps they needed clarification on my role during tomorrow's audit, or wanted to discuss my transition responsibilities once the acquisition closed. I saved my work, locked my computer screen, and walked the 30 steps to conference room B with the measured pace of someone who wasn't allowing herself to panic. The door was already closed when I arrived. I knocked once and entered to find Jessica sitting across from David Miller, a folder of documents spread between them on the small conference table. David didn't look up when I entered. He was studying his tablet with the intense concentration of someone avoiding eye contact. Jessica gestured to the single empty chair facing both of them. The setup felt deliberately intimidating, like a tribunal rather than a business meeting. "Please sit down, Sarah," Jessica said, maintaining that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "We appreciate you taking the time to meet with us on such short notice." I sat down and folded my hands in my lap, keeping my expression neutral while my mind raced through possibilities. Had someone complained about my management style? Was there a problem with my security clearance for tomorrow's audit? Had I somehow violated a company policy without realizing it? David finally looked up from his tablet, and I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was satisfaction. The look of someone who had been planning this moment and was finally getting to execute his plan. "Sarah," he began, his voice carrying the flat, rehearsed tone of someone delivering prepared remarks. "We've made the difficult decision to restructure our technical operations team as part of our pre-acquisition optimization strategy. After careful consideration and consultation with our executive leadership, we've determined that your position as lead systems integration specialist is being eliminated effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs and had to focus on breathing normally while processing what he had just said. They were firing me on the day before the most important technical demonstration in the company's history. The demonstration that would determine whether DataCorp's $47 million investment was justified. "I don't understand," I managed to say, my voice sounding surprisingly steady despite the chaos in my mind. "The technical audit is tomorrow. DataCorp is specifically evaluating the integration platform. Every system they're going to test was built by me." David's expression didn't change. "We're confident that the transition will be seamless. The integration platform is well documented, and we have capable team members who can handle the technical demonstration." I stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was saying. Marcus Webb, the junior developer who still needed help configuring basic database connections, was going to demonstrate sophisticated enterprise integration capabilities to DataCorp's technical experts. Rachel Kim, despite her intelligence and potential, had been working with our systems for less than 2 years and had never been involved in a high-stakes technical audit. David, with all due respect, neither Marcus nor Rachel has the experience to handle this level of technical evaluation. These systems require deep understanding of the architecture, the edge cases, the performance optimization strategies. I've been preparing for this audit for weeks." "Sarah," Jessica interjected gently, "we understand this news is unexpected, but the decision has been made at the executive level. We're offering a generous severance package that includes 8 weeks of salary continuation and full health insurance coverage through the end of the year." 8 weeks. They were valuing 3 years of creating their most valuable asset at 8 weeks of severance pay. I looked at the folder of documents between them and realized this conversation was just a formality. The decision had been made before I walked into the room. They weren't seeking my input or trying to address my concerns. They were executing a plan that had been developed without my knowledge. Can I ask why this decision was made now? I asked, genuinely trying to understand the logic. If this was about cost reduction or organizational restructuring, why not wait until after the acquisition closes? Why risk the technical audit? David leaned forward slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something vindictive in his expression. Sarah, your technical skills have been valuable, but we need team members who can collaborate effectively and support the broader organizational vision. The integration platform you've built is impressive, but it's also created dependencies that aren't healthy for the company long term. We need to move toward more distributed technical ownership. There it was. The real reason. David had spent 18 months being threatened by my expertise, intimidated by his inability to understand or control the systems I had built. Rather than acknowledge his limitations, he had convinced the executives that my competence was actually a liability. I was being fired not despite my technical abilities, but because of them. I see, I said quietly. So this is about reducing dependencies. Exactly, David replied, seeming pleased that I was finally understanding his strategic thinking. No single individual should be irreplaceable in a well-designed organization. We need systems and processes that can function regardless of personnel changes. I almost laughed. David was firing me because he considered me irreplaceable, apparently not realizing that being irreplaceable might be relevant when your company was being acquired specifically for the systems I had created. But I kept my expression neutral and nodded as if his explanation made perfect sense. Of course, I said. That's sound management philosophy. Jessica pushed the severance agreement across the table toward me. We'll need you to review and sign these documents before you leave today. The terms are quite generous, and there's a standard non-disclosure agreement that protects both parties. I glanced at the documents without picking them up. A severance agreement, a non-disclosure agreement, a technology transfer acknowledgement, and a non-compete clause. They wanted to ensure that I couldn't discuss their business practices, couldn't claim ownership of the systems I had built, and couldn't immediately join a competitor. I'll need some time to review these with an attorney, I said. Unfortunately, we need these signed today, David replied. Security protocols require that terminated employees complete all paperwork before their access is revoked. Security protocols. As if I were a security risk rather than the person who had built the systems they were trying to protect. I looked at David's face and realized that he genuinely believed he was handling this situation professionally and appropriately. In his mind, he was making a difficult but necessary business decision. He had no understanding of what he was actually doing. I understand, I said, reaching for my purse and pulling out a pen. Before I sign anything, I'll need to transfer my system access credentials to ensure a smooth transition. David's eyes lit up. This was exactly what he had been hoping for. Evidence that I was being cooperative and professional, that his transition plan was working perfectly. That would be very helpful, he said. We'll need administrative access to all integration platforms, API keys, database connections, and any specialized authentication protocols, their emotional needs or ulterior motives. During the party, my mother pulled me aside to tell me how proud she was of the family Marcus and I had created. Watching you parent, Isabella, she said, I can see how much you learned from everything you went through with Sophia. I pulled out my notebook and began writing down a series of usernames and passwords. These were legitimate credentials that would give them access to the user interfaces of my integration systems. They could log in, view connection statuses, run basic diagnostics, and perform routine maintenance tasks. What they couldn't do was access the administrative backend, modify core authentication protocols, or perform the kind of stress testing that would be required for tomorrow's technical audit. But David didn't know the difference. To him, a password was a password, and access was access. He had no understanding of the multi-layered security architecture that protected critical systems from unauthorized administrative access. These credentials will give you access to all the integration platforms, I said, tearing the page from my notebook and handing it to him. The systems are all well documented, and Marcus should be able to handle any questions that come up during the audit. David folded the paper and slipped it into his shirt pocket like he was securing the keys to the kingdom. Thank you, Sarah. This level of professionalism makes the transition much easier for everyone. I signed the severance agreement, the non-disclosure agreement, and the other documents without reading them carefully. I was too focused on suppressing the mixture of rage and disbelief that was building in my chest. These people had no idea what they were doing. They were firing the architect of their most valuable asset on the day before that asset would determine their company's future. I think that covers everything, Jessica said, gathering the signed documents into her folder. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings, and then we'll need your badge and any company equipment. Of course, I replied, standing up from the small conference table. I hope tomorrow's audit goes well. David finally made eye contact with me, and I saw that vindictive satisfaction again. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully removed a threat to his authority while maintaining control of the systems that justified his position. I'm confident it will, he said. We have a strong technical team, and the integration platform is robust enough to handle any evaluation. I nodded politely and walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I turned back to face them one more time. David, can I ask you a technical question? Sure, he replied, clearly pleased to demonstrate his expertise. Do you know what happens when the continuity verification protocols activate during high-stress system testing? David's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The what protocols? Never mind, I said with a smile. I'm sure Marcus can explain it to you if it comes up. I walked out of conference room B and closed the door behind me, leaving David to wonder what continuity verification protocols were and why they might be relevant to tomorrow's audit. The walk from conference room B to my desk felt like moving through water. Everything seemed slower, more deliberate, as if the universe had downshifted into a different gear. I was aware of my colleagues going about their normal routines, typing at keyboards, taking phone calls, discussing weekend plans, completely unaware that their company's future had just been catastrophically compromised by a man who didn't understand the difference between managing people and understanding technology. I sat down at my workstation and stared at the dual monitors that had been my window into the complex digital ecosystem I had spent 3 years creating. My email inbox showed 17 unread messages, most of them routine status updates and meeting confirmations for tomorrow's audit. The Data Corp technical team was arriving at 2 p.m. The conference room was booked from 2 to 6 p.m. for integration demonstrations. The champagne was chilling in the break room refrigerator. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the choice I was facing. I could be professional, helpful, and gracious in defeat. I could spend my remaining hours at TechFlow, writing detailed documentation for Marcus and Rachel, explaining the nuances of the integration architecture, outlining the potential complications they might encounter during the audit. I could try to salvage the situation by giving them enough information to stumble through tomorrow's demonstration without completely humiliating themselves. Or I could let David Miller learn exactly what it meant to fire the architect on demolition day. The decision crystallized with perfect clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was too hot, too emotional, too reactive for what this situation required. What I felt instead was something colder and more purposeful. David had made a calculated move to eliminate me as a threat to his authority. I was going to make an equally calculated response that would demonstrate the consequences of that decision. I opened my laptop and navigated to a hidden directory that I had labeled Project Continuity 3 years ago. The folder contained the administrative protocols that governed the deepest levels of my integration architecture. These weren't malicious backdoors or hidden kill switches. They were legitimate security measures that I had built to protect critical systems from unauthorized access or incompetent administration. Every sophisticated technical system needs safeguards against misuse. Financial trading platforms have circuit breakers that halt operations if market conditions become too volatile. Nuclear power plants have automatic shutdown procedures that activate if safety parameters are exceeded. My integration platform had continuity verification protocols that required authentication from the original architect before allowing high-level administrative access or stress testing procedures. The protocols were designed to activate in exactly the situation that TechFlow now faced. If the original architect was suddenly removed from the company, if someone without appropriate expertise attempted to demonstrate critical systems under high-stress conditions, or if unauthorized personnel tried to access administrative functions they didn't understand, the continuity verification protocols would engage enhanced security measures until the situation could be properly resolved. I had never mentioned these protocols to David or anyone else in management because they were technical implementation details, like error handling routines or data validation procedures. You don't explain every safety feature to people who wouldn't understand their purpose. But now, with my termination effective immediately and a critical technical audit scheduled for tomorrow, the protocols were about to become very relevant. I activated the monitoring subroutines that would track all access attempts to my integration systems over the next 72 hours. Any routine operations would proceed normally. Client integrations would continue functioning without interruption. But any attempts to demonstrate the systems under the high-load conditions that would be required for tomorrow's audit would trigger authentication requirements that only I could satisfy. It took exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds to activate the protocols. No dramatic alarms, no warning messages, no visible changes to any system interfaces. The safeguards were now in place, invisible and waiting. I closed my laptop and began the process of packing my personal belongings. 3 years of my professional life needed to fit into the cardboard box that security guard Mike had brought to my desk. The framed photograph of my daughter Emma at her college graduation. The small jade plant that had somehow thrived despite the office's harsh fluorescent lighting. The coffee mug that Rachel had given me last Christmas with Integration Goddess, printed on the side. The mechanical keyboard that I had bought with my own money because I refused to use the cheap membrane keyboards that TechFlow provided. I left behind everything that belonged to the company. The awards and recognition plaques that had once made me feel valued. The branded notebooks filled with ideas for system improvements. The company laptop that contained 3 years of technical documentation. None of that was mine anymore. Marcus Webb appeared at my cubicle while I was wrapping the jade plant in paper towels. He looked confused and concerned, clearly having heard rumors about my termination but not understanding the implications. "Sarah, is it true that you're leaving?" he asked, his voice carrying the uncertainty of someone who suddenly realized they might be in over their head. "It's true, Marcus. David has decided that the company no longer needs my services." "But what about tomorrow's audit? I mean, you're the one who built all the integration systems. I don't know how to demonstrate enterprise-level capabilities to Datacorp's technical team." I looked at Marcus and felt a moment of genuine sympathy. He was a capable developer within his areas of expertise, but he had never been involved in high-stakes technical demonstrations. He had never had to explain complex system architecture to skeptical evaluators who were looking for any sign of weakness or limitation. He was about to be thrown into a situation that would have challenged experienced senior architects. "Marcus, you'll do fine," I said, continuing to pack my belongings. "The integration systems are well documented, and David is confident that the transition will be seamless. But what if something goes wrong? What if they ask questions I can't answer? What if the systems don't perform the way they're supposed to?" I paused in my packing and looked directly at him. Marcus was asking exactly the right questions, demonstrating more awareness of the potential problems than David had shown during our termination meeting. But it was too late for awareness now. "Marcus, I've transferred all my access credentials to David. He has everything he needs to support you during the audit. If you run into any problems, just ask him for guidance." "David doesn't know anything about system architecture," Marcus said, lowering his voice. "He can barely use the user interface, let alone explain how the back-end integration protocols work." "Then maybe David should have thought about that before he decided to fire me on the day before the most important technical demonstration in company history." Marcus stared at me, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened. "Sarah, you can't just leave us hanging like this. This audit determines whether the acquisition goes through. If Datacorp pulls out of the deal, the company could go under. Marcus, I'm not leaving you hanging, I was fired. There's a difference." David Miller made a decision about what's best for TechFlow's future. I'm sure he's considered all the implications. I finished packing and closed the cardboard box. 3 years of building the most sophisticated integration platform in the mid-market space, reduced to a collection of personal items that fit in a container designed for shipping books. Rachel Kim had been watching our conversation from her desk across the aisle. She approached as Marcus walked away, shaking his head and muttering about impossible situations and corporate incompetence. "Sarah, this doesn't make any sense," Rachel said quietly. "Why would they fire you now? Everyone knows you're the only person who really understands how these systems work." "Rachel, I've learned that corporate decisions don't always align with technical realities. David has his reasons for restructuring the team, and I'm sure they're valid from his perspective. But what are we supposed to do tomorrow? Marcus is panicking, and I've never even seen the administrative interfaces for the integration platform. We don't know how to demonstrate enterprise-level capabilities." I looked at Rachel, seeing the intelligence and potential that had made me hope she could eventually take on significant integration responsibilities. Given time and proper mentoring, she could have become an excellent systems architect. But time was exactly what they didn't have. "Rachel, you're smart and capable. You'll figure it out. The systems are designed to be robust and reliable. Just focus on demonstrating the features that you understand, and don't try to oversell capabilities that you can't properly explain. That's not going to be enough for a $47 million acquisition audit. Datacorp's technical team is going to want to see performance under stress, scalability demonstrations, error handling protocols, security implementations. They're going to ask questions that require deep system knowledge." Rachel was absolutely right, of course. A successful acquisition audit required much more than basic feature demonstrations. Datacorp needed to verify that our integration platform could handle enterprise-level data volumes, that it would scale effectively across their client base, that it included appropriate security measures for sensitive business data. They needed to understand the system architecture well enough to plan for future development and maintenance. None of that was possible without the person who had designed and built the systems. "Rachel, I have confidence in your abilities. You and Marcus will do your best, and that's all anyone can ask. Sarah, please, can't you at least stay until after the audit? Or provide remote support if they run into problems? This is bigger than whatever disagreement you had with David." I almost smiled at her assumption that this was about a disagreement. Rachel was thinking like an engineer, trying to solve a technical problem with technical solutions. She didn't understand that this wasn't a technical problem. This was a power struggle that David had initiated and was now going to lose spectacularly. "Rachel, I signed a severance agreement that includes immediate termination of my employment relationship with TechFlow. I'm not legally authorized to provide any technical support or consultation after I leave the building today. But you could consult informally, right? If someone called you with a quick question, you could point them in the right direction." I looked at Rachel's earnest expression and realized that she still didn't understand what was really happening. She thought this was about helping the company succeed, despite David's poor decision-making. She didn't realize that helping the company succeed would validate David's belief that technical expertise was replaceable, that individual contributors didn't matter as much as management oversight. "Rachel, David has made it clear that TechFlow no longer needs my technical expertise. I'm going to respect that decision and let him demonstrate the wisdom of his management approach." Security guard Mike appeared at my cubicle with the apologetic expression of someone who had to enforce policies he didn't agree with. Mike had been with TechFlow since the company's early days. He had watched me work late nights and weekends, had seen me debugging critical issues while other people went home to their families. He knew exactly how valuable I was to the company's operations. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but I need to escort you to the exit and collect your badge and any company equipment." "Of course, Mike, I understand you're just doing your job." I handed him my employee badge, my company credit card, and the spare office keys that I had never actually used. My laptop and company phone were already on my desk, logged out and powered down. "This isn't right, Sarah," Mike said quietly as we walked toward the elevator. "Everyone knows you built the systems that made this acquisition possible. Firing you now is just crazy." "Mike, I appreciate your support, but David has his reasons. I'm sure he knows what he's doing." We rode the elevator down to the main floor in silence. As the doors opened, I could see David through the glass walls of the main conference room, gesturing animatedly while explaining something to a group of executives. He looked confident and in control, probably briefing them on his successful elimination of a problematic employee and his smooth transition plan for tomorrow's audit. "Sarah," Mike said as we reached the main exit, "I hope things work out for you. You're one of the good ones." "Thanks, Mike. Take care of yourself." I walked out of TechFlow Solutions carrying my cardboard box and feeling lighter than I had in months. Behind me, David Miller was preparing to demonstrate systems he didn't understand to evaluators who would immediately recognize his incompetence. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., when DataCorp's technical team arrived for their audit, he would discover exactly what happened when you fired the architect on the day before demolition. I drove straight to Café Luna, the small coffee shop 4 blocks from TechFlow that had become my refuge during stressful periods over the past 3 years. Luna was owned by an elderly Italian woman named Maria, who made the best espresso in the city and never asked questions about why someone might need to work on a laptop in a corner booth for hours at a time. The cafe was quiet in the early afternoon, with only a few customers scattered at tables near the windows. I ordered a double espresso and settled into my usual corner booth, the one with a clear view of TechFlow's office building, but enough distance to feel safely removed from the chaos that was about to unfold. My laptop connected automatically to Luna's Wi-Fi network, a connection I had configured months ago during a particularly difficult integration project that had required round-the-clock monitoring. The first thing I did was check the status of the continuity verification protocols I had activated before leaving the office. The monitoring dashboard showed normal baseline activity across all integration platforms. Client systems were synchronizing data normally, routine maintenance tasks were executing on schedule, and there were no error conditions or unusual access patterns. Everything was functioning exactly as it should, for now. The continuity verification protocols were designed to remain dormant during normal operations. They only activated when someone attempted to perform administrative functions that required deep system knowledge. Functions like stress testing under high data volumes, demonstrating scalability across multiple client environments simultaneously, or configuring new integration endpoints for evaluation purposes. The kind of functions that would be essential for tomorrow's technical audit. I opened a secure connection to the administrative backend of my integration platform and began reviewing the authentication logs. Over the past 3 years, I had been the only person with access to these deep system controls. David had never even known they existed. Marcus and Rachel had been limited to user-level interfaces that allowed them to monitor existing integrations and perform basic troubleshooting, but they had never needed administrative access for their day-to-day responsibilities. Tomorrow, for the first time, someone other than me would need to demonstrate the full capabilities of the integration platform to a sophisticated technical audience. They would need to show DataCorp's evaluators that our systems could handle enterprise-level data volumes, that they could scale seamlessly across multiple client environments, that they included robust error handling and security protocols. They would need administrative access to configure test scenarios, monitor performance metrics, and demonstrate the architectural sophistication that justified a $47 million acquisition, access that only I could authorize. I pulled up the technical requirements for tomorrow's audit, documents that DataCorp had shared with TechFlow weeks ago to ensure that we would be prepared for their evaluation. The requirements were comprehensive and demanding, designed to verify that our integration platform could meet the needs of DataCorp's enterprise clients. They wanted to see real-time synchronization between our CRM system and at least 6 different external platforms simultaneously, with data volumes that exceeded our normal client usage by a factor of 10. They wanted to see how the system handled network interruptions, API rate limiting, and authentication failures across multiple platforms. They wanted demonstrations of our security protocols, our data validation procedures, and our error recovery mechanisms. Most importantly, they wanted to understand the system architecture well enough to plan for future development and scaling. They would ask detailed questions about database design, API implementation, performance optimization strategies, and integration methodologies. They would want to see the administrative tools that would allow their technical team to extend and maintain the platform after the acquisition. None of that was possible without administrative access to the systems. And administrative access required authentication that only I could provide. I reviewed the specific demonstration scenarios that David had approved for tomorrow's audit. He had scheduled 6 different integration demonstrations, each designed to showcase a different aspect of our platform's capabilities. The demonstrations were ambitious and comprehensive, exactly the kind of technical showcase that would impress Datacorp's evaluators and justify their investment. They were also completely impossible without my involvement. The first demonstration involved connecting our CRM system to Salesforce, HubSpot, and Microsoft Dynamics simultaneously, then synchronizing customer data across all three platforms in real time, while Datacorp's team monitored performance metrics. This required administrative access to configure the test environment, optimize database queries for high-volume operations, and enable detailed logging that would show Datacorp exactly how the synchronization protocols worked. The second demonstration focused on our e-commerce integration capabilities, showing how our platform could manage inventory synchronization between a client's internal systems and external marketplaces like Amazon, eBay, and Shopify. This demonstration required access to sandbox environments that I had configured specifically for testing purposes, environments that were protected by the same continuity verification protocols as the production systems. Each subsequent demonstration built on the previous ones, showing increasingly sophisticated integration capabilities that require deeper and deeper access to the system architecture. By the end of the 6-hour audit, Datacorp's technical team would have seen every major feature of our integration platform, understood the elegance of the underlying architecture, and confirmed that the system could handle their most demanding enterprise requirements. Or they would have seen David Miller and Marcus Webb struggling to access systems they didn't understand, failing to demonstrate capabilities they couldn't properly configure, and ultimately proving that TechFlow's most valuable asset was controlled by someone who was no longer employed by the company. I sipped my espresso and opened a new document on my laptop. If David wanted to demonstrate that individual technical expertise didn't matter, that well-managed teams could deliver results regardless of personnel changes, then I was going to give him the opportunity to prove his management philosophy under the most demanding possible circumstances. I began documenting the specific technical requirements for each demonstration on tomorrow's audit schedule. Not the user-friendly summaries that David had been working with, but the detailed implementation requirements that would be necessary for successful execution. Database configuration parameters, API authentication protocols, performance monitoring procedures, error handling implementations. The documentation was thorough, accurate, and completely useless without the administrative access needed to implement it. I saved the document with the file name Audit Implementation Guide and attached it to an email addressed to David Miller, Marcus Webb, and Rachel Kim. The email was brief and professional. Per our discussion earlier today, I wanted to provide technical documentation that might be helpful for tomorrow's audit. The attached guide outlines the implementation requirements for each demonstration scenario. I'm confident that your team will be able to execute these requirements successfully. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions, though please note that my consulting availability may be limited due to the terms of my severance agreement. Best wishes for a successful audit, Sarah. I scheduled the email to be sent at 6 p.m., 2 hours after Datacorp's technical team was scheduled to arrive for their preliminary meetings with TechFlow's executives. By the time David received my helpful documentation, he would already be committed to the audit schedule and would have no time to make alternative arrangements. I closed my laptop and ordered another espresso. Through the window, I could see the TechFlow office building, where David Miller was probably spending his afternoon reviewing demonstration scripts and feeling confident about his decision to eliminate an unnecessary dependency. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., he would discover that some dependencies were more necessary than others. The sun was beginning to set behind the office buildings downtown, casting long shadows across the street. In 18 hours, Datacorp's technical team would arrive for the most important evaluation in TechFlow's history. They would expect to see sophisticated integration capabilities demonstrated by confident technical experts who understood every nuance of the systems they had built. Instead, they would see David Miller learning that firing the architect on demolition day was never a good idea. I spent that evening at home in my small apartment overlooking the river, systematically separating my professional life from my personal life in ways I had never needed to consider before. 3 years at TechFlow had blurred the boundaries between my work identity and my personal identity. I had invested so much of myself in building those integration systems that they had become extensions of my own expertise and creativity. Now I needed to reclaim ownership of my knowledge and skills. I started by backing up all the personal technical documentation I had created over the years. Not company property, but the notes, research, and learning materials that I had developed to improve my own expertise. Articles I had bookmarked about emerging integration technologies. Code samples I had written to test new approaches. Architectural diagrams I had sketched to work through complex design problems. All of this was my intellectual property, created with my own time and resources, and I had every right to take it with me. I also backed up my professional network. Contact information for integration specialists at other companies, relationships with technical vendors, connections with industry experts who had provided advice and consultation over the years. These relationships were mine, built through years of professional interaction and mutual respect. They would be valuable regardless of where my career took me next. Most importantly, I backed up my reputation. Screenshots of LinkedIn recommendations, copies of conference presentations I had delivered, documentation of open-source contributions I had made to integration frameworks, evidence of the expertise I had developed, and the recognition I had earned from peers in the industry. TechFlow owned the systems I had built while employed by them, but they didn't own my knowledge, my skills, or my professional relationships. David Miller could fire me, but he couldn't fire my expertise. I made a list of everyone I should contact about my sudden availability. Recruiters who had approached me with opportunities over the years. Former colleagues who had moved to other companies. Industry contacts who might know about integration architecture positions. My LinkedIn profile needed updating, my resume needed refreshing, and I needed to start thinking strategically about my next career move. But not tonight. Tonight, I was going to allow myself to feel the emotions I had been suppressing since my termination meeting. Anger at David's incompetence and vindictiveness. Frustration with executives who didn't understand the technical realities of their own business. Disappointment that 3 years of excellent work had been dismissed so casually. And underneath those emotions, something that surprised me: relief. I had been carrying the responsibility for TechFlow's technical infrastructure for 3 years, working evenings and weekends to maintain systems that generated millions of dollars in revenue while being managed by people who didn't understand their complexity or value. I had been the single point of failure for integration capabilities that dozens of clients depended on, constantly worried about what would happen if I got sick, went on vacation, or simply burned out from the pressure. Now that responsibility belonged to David Miller. He was the engineering director, he had the authority to make personnel decisions, and he would live with the consequences of those decisions. Tomorrow, when DataCorp's technical team asked detailed questions about system architecture, David would need to provide intelligent answers. When they requested demonstrations of advanced capabilities, David would need to ensure successful execution. When they evaluated TechFlow's technical competence, David would be representing the company's engineering expertise. I opened a bottle of wine and sat on my small balcony overlooking the river, watching the lights come on in office buildings across the water. Somewhere in one of those buildings, David Miller was probably working late, preparing for tomorrow's audit with the confidence of someone who believed that management oversight was more valuable than technical expertise. Tomorrow, he would learn the difference. My phone buzzed with a text message from Emma, my daughter, who was finishing her senior year at UC Davis. She was studying business administration with a focus on organizational psychology, and we often discussed the challenges of managing technical teams in corporate environments. "Hey Mom, how is your day? Still dealing with that incompetent manager?" I stared at the message for a moment, realizing that Emma didn't know about my termination yet. I had been planning to tell her about the acquisition, about the potential career opportunities that might emerge from DataCorp's interest in our integration platform. Instead, I would be telling her about corporate betrayal and the importance of building career resilience. "Actually, something interesting happened today. I'll call you this weekend to fill you in. Love you." "Everything okay? You sound cryptic." "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just some workplace drama that will probably resolve itself soon." I put my phone aside and focused on the peaceful view from my balcony. Tomorrow would bring chaos and consequences, but tonight was mine. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't need to worry about system alerts, client complaints, or David Miller's latest management initiatives. Someone else was responsible for TechFlow's technical operations now. Someone else would discover what happened when you eliminated the person who actually understood how everything worked. I finished my wine and went inside to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day, and I wanted to be well rested for the show. I woke up Tuesday morning feeling more refreshed than I had in months. No urgent emails about system failures. No panicked calls about integration problems. No pressure to fix issues that other people had created. For the first time in 3 years, my morning routine belonged entirely to me. I made coffee using the expensive beans I usually reserved for weekends, sat on my balcony reading the news, and watched the city wake up below me. Somewhere across town, David Miller was probably arriving early at TechFlow, running through his final preparations for the most important day in the company's history. The DataCorp technical team was scheduled to arrive at 2 p.m. for 6 hours of comprehensive system evaluations that would determine whether a $47 million acquisition moved forward or collapsed entirely. At 9:30 a.m., I opened my laptop and checked the monitoring dashboard for my integration systems. Normal baseline activity across all platforms. Client data synchronizing properly. Routine maintenance tasks executing on schedule. No error conditions or unusual access patterns. The systems were functioning perfectly, just as they had been designed to do. The continuity verification protocols remained dormant, waiting for someone to attempt the kind of administrative access that would be required for today's technical demonstrations. So far, no one had tried to access the deep system controls that would trigger enhanced authentication requirements. David was probably still operating under the assumption that the user-level credentials I had provided yesterday would be sufficient for today's audit. At 10:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with the first text message from Rachel Kim. "Sarah, I hope you're doing okay. Just wanted to let you know that we're all thinking about you today." I smiled and typed back, "Thanks, Rachel. I'm sure you and Marcus will do great with the audit. David has everything under control." At 10:43 a.m., another message from Rachel. "Actually, we're running into some issues with the demonstration setup. The system won't let us access the performance monitoring tools we need for the stress testing. Do you know what the admin password might be for the advanced diagnostics?" I paused with my coffee cup halfway to my lips. They were encountering the first layer of authentication requirements, the preliminary safeguards that protected administrative functions from unauthorized access. These weren't the continuity verification protocols yet, just standard security measures that required proper credentials for sensitive operations. "I'm sorry, Rachel, but I don't have access to those systems anymore. You'll need to check with David about administrative credentials. David says the passwords you gave him should work for everything, but they're not working for the advanced functions." Of course they weren't. The credentials I had provided to David gave them access to user interfaces and basic operational controls, but not to the administrative backend that would be necessary for sophisticated technical demonstrations. David didn't understand the difference because he had never needed to understand the difference. "Rachel, I gave David all the access information I was authorized to provide. If there are additional security measures, then David will need to work with IT to resolve them." "But Sarah, you are IT. You built these systems. If you don't know how to access them, then nobody does." Rachel was starting to understand the magnitude of the problem, but she was still thinking like an engineer trying to solve a technical puzzle. She didn't realize that this wasn't a technical problem anymore. This was David Miller learning that firing the architect had consequences. I finished my coffee and decided to take a walk through the downtown district. If I happened to walk past TechFlow's office building, and if I happened to observe any unusual activity through the large windows that faced the street, that would just be coincidental. I wasn't an employee anymore, but I was still a concerned citizen who hoped local businesses would succeed. The walk took me past several other technology companies where I had interviewed over the years. Sleek office buildings filled with talented people building innovative solutions to complex problems. Companies that understood the value of technical expertise and treated their architects as strategic assets rather than replaceable components. As I approached TechFlow's building, I could see unusual activity through the ground floor windows. People moving around more quickly than normal, clusters of conversations in the hallway, the kind of nervous energy that preceded high-stakes presentations. David was probably giving pep talks and reviewing demonstration scripts with Marcus and Rachel, confident that his preparation and leadership would ensure a successful audit. At 11:57 a.m., my phone rang. Marcus Webb calling directly instead of texting. Sarah, I'm really sorry to bother you, but we're having serious problems with the system setup for this afternoon. Nothing we're trying is working the way it's supposed to. What kind of problems, Marcus? The integration platform won't let us configure the test environments for the DataCorp demonstrations. Every time we try to access the administrative controls, we get authentication errors. David says you gave him all the passwords, but none of them work for the functions we need. Marcus, those are the only credentials I had access to provide. If you're encountering authentication requirements beyond what I shared, then those must be security measures that I wasn't authorized to override. But Sarah, you built these systems. How can there be security measures that you don't have access to? Marcus was asking the right question, but he was asking it too late. There weren't security measures that I didn't have access to. There were security measures that required my active participation to override, measures that David had unknowingly triggered by terminating my employment before a critical system evaluation. Marcus, I understand your frustration, but I'm no longer a TechFlow employee. I can't provide technical support for systems that I don't have authorization to access. Sarah, please. The DataCorp team arrives in 2 hours. If we can't demonstrate the integration capabilities, the entire acquisition could fall apart. People's jobs are on the line. I felt a moment of genuine sympathy for Marcus. He was caught in an impossible situation created by David's incompetence and arrogance. But sympathy didn't change the fundamental reality that David had created this crisis by firing the person who could resolve it. Marcus, I suggest you escalate this to David immediately. He's the engineering director, and he has the authority to make decisions about how to handle technical problems. David is in meetings with the executives, preparing for the DataCorp arrival. He told us to figure it out ourselves and not bother him unless it's a real emergency. Marcus, this sounds like a real emergency. I hung up and continued my walk, circling the block to approach TechFlow's building from a different angle. Through the second-floor windows, I could see the conference room where this afternoon's demonstrations were supposed to take place. Someone had set up multiple laptops and external monitors, creating a presentation environment that would allow DataCorp's technical team to observe system performance in real time. The setup looked professional and impressive, exactly the kind of technical showcase that would demonstrate TechFlow's integration capabilities effectively. Unfortunately, the impressive setup was worthless, without the ability to actually operate the systems it was supposed to demonstrate. At 12:21 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Sarah, Marcus is having a panic attack. David is still in meetings. The DataCorp team arrives in 90 minutes. Please, is there anything you can do to help us? I stopped walking and stood on the sidewalk across from TechFlow's building, looking up at the second-floor conference room where the audit was supposed to take place. Rachel was asking me to save David Miller from the consequences of his own decision. She was asking me to validate his belief that technical expertise could be dismissed casually and recovered conveniently. Rachel, I understand this is a stressful situation, but I'm not authorized to provide technical support for TechFlow systems anymore. You'll need to work with David to find a solution. But what if there isn't a solution? What if the audit fails because we can't access the systems? Then I suppose that would be unfortunate for everyone involved. I put my phone in my pocket and found a bench across the street from TechFlow's building. From this vantage point, I had a clear view of the main entrance and the second-floor conference room. If DataCorp's technical team arrived as scheduled, I would be able to observe their arrival and departure. If they left earlier than expected, that would tell me everything I needed to know about how the audit had progressed. At 12:45 p.m., I watched David Miller exit the building and walk quickly to his car in the parking garage. He looked stressed and urgent, probably rushing to pick up lunch for the DataCorp team or handling some last-minute preparation crisis. He had no idea that the crisis he was trying to manage was about to become a catastrophe. At 1:15 p.m., 3 black sedans pulled into TechFlow's parking lot. The DataCorp technical team had arrived 15 minutes early, probably wanting extra time to set up their evaluation equipment and review the demonstration schedule. I watched 6 people in business attire exit the vehicles and walk toward TechFlow's main entrance. Patricia Wong, DataCorp's chief technology officer, was easy to identify from the company photos I had seen during the acquisition discussions. She was a woman in her early 50s with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who had spent decades evaluating technical systems for billion-dollar corporations. She would not be impressed by amateur hour. The other members of the team appeared to be senior technical specialists, the kind of people who could identify system limitations and architectural weaknesses within minutes of beginning their evaluation. They would ask detailed questions about database design, API implementation, security protocols, and performance optimization. They would want to see stress testing results, scalability demonstrations, and error handling procedures. They would expect to be working with technical experts who could answer their questions intelligently and demonstrate system capabilities confidently. Instead, they were about to meet Marcus Webb and David Miller. At 1:32 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Chen, this is Patricia Wong from DataCorp. I understand you're no longer with TechFlow, but I was hoping I could speak with you briefly about the integration platform we're evaluating today. I felt a moment of surprise, followed by curiosity. Patricia Wong was calling me directly, which meant she either had serious concerns about the upcoming audit or had already encountered problems with TechFlow's technical team. Of course, Ms. Wong. I'd be happy to speak with you, though I should mention that I'm no longer employed by TechFlow and have limited authority to discuss their technical systems. I understand completely. I just wanted to clarify some technical questions that have come up during our preliminary discussions with TechFlow's current technical team. To be frank, Ms. Chen, we're not getting the level of detailed technical insight that we need to properly evaluate this acquisition. I see. What specific areas are causing concern? Well, we've asked to review the administrative interfaces for the integration platform, and we're being told that there are access issues that are still being resolved. We've also asked detailed questions about the system architecture, and the responses we're receiving suggest a limited understanding of the underlying design principles. Patricia Wong was diplomatically stating that TechFlow's current technical team was incompetent to handle a sophisticated evaluation. She was calling me because she suspected that the people she was supposed to be working with didn't actually understand the systems they were supposed to be demonstrating. Ms. Wong, I appreciate your confidence in my technical knowledge, but I'm not authorized to provide technical support for TechFlow's systems or to participate in acquisition discussions. You'll need to work with their current technical team to resolve any access or understanding issues. Ms. Chen, may I speak candidly? We've been evaluating technical acquisitions for 15 years. We know the difference between temporary access problems and fundamental competence problems. What we're seeing today suggests that TechFlow may not have the technical resources necessary to support the integration platform that we're considering acquiring. Patricia Wong was telling me that DataCorp's evaluation team had already identified serious problems with TechFlow's technical capabilities. They had spent less than 30 minutes with David Miller and Marcus Webb and had concluded that these people didn't understand the systems they were supposed to be demonstrating. Ms. Wong, I understand your concerns, but I'm not in a position to comment on TechFlow's current technical resources or capabilities. I wish you the best of luck with your evaluation. Ms. Chen, would you be available for a separate conversation about your experience with integration architecture? Not related to TechFlow specifically, but about your general expertise in this area? I paused, understanding exactly what Patricia Wong was really asking. She wanted to know if I would be interested in discussing employment opportunities with DataCorp, independent of their acquisition discussions with TechFlow. She was already thinking about alternatives to the acquisition, alternatives that might involve hiring the architect directly, rather than buying the company that had fired her. Ms. Wong, I'd be very interested in discussing integration architecture with you, though it might be appropriate to wait until after your current evaluation is complete. Of course. I'll be in touch soon, Ms. Chen. Thank you for your time. I hung up and looked across the street at TechFlow's building, where DataCorp's technical team was about to begin a comprehensive evaluation of systems that TechFlow's current employees couldn't access or explain. Patricia Wong had essentially confirmed that the audit was already failing before it had officially begun. David Miller had fired me yesterday to prove that individual technical expertise didn't matter. In 30 minutes, he was going to discover exactly how wrong he had been. At exactly 2 p.m., I watched through the second-floor windows as the technical audit officially began. The conference room was brightly lit, with multiple laptops and monitors arranged around a large table where DataCorp's evaluation team sat facing TechFlow's technical representatives. From my bench across the street, I could see figures moving around the room, pointing at screens, and engaging in what appeared to be increasingly animated discussions. I couldn't hear the conversations, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening because I had designed the systems that were supposed to be demonstrated and built the security protocols that were preventing those demonstrations from taking place. At 2:17 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Sarah, this is a disaster. We can't access any of the administrative functions for the integration platform. The DataCorp team is asking questions we can't answer. David is starting to panic." At 2:31 p.m., another message from Rachel. "The DataCorp people are asking to speak with the original system architect. David told them that person is no longer with the company. They're not happy." I smiled and typed back, "I'm sure David will figure something out. He's very resourceful." At 2:45 p.m., Marcus called me directly, his voice tight with stress and barely controlled panic. "Sarah, please, you have to help us. The DataCorp team wants to see stress testing results for the integration platform, but we can't access the performance monitoring tools. They want to review the system architecture documentation, but we can't find the administrative interface where that information is stored. They're asking detailed questions about database optimization and API implementation that we don't know how to answer." Marcus, I understand this is frustrating, but these are exactly the kinds of challenges that David anticipated when he decided to restructure the technical team. I'm sure he has contingency plans for this situation. Sarah, David doesn't have contingency plans. He doesn't understand these systems any better than we do. The only difference is that he's better at pretending he knows what he's talking about. Marcus was finally acknowledging what everyone except David had known all along, that firing me had eliminated TechFlow's only source of deep technical knowledge about their most valuable asset. But acknowledging the problem didn't solve it. "Marcus, have you explained to David that you need administrative access to demonstrate the systems properly? We've been trying to explain that to David for the past hour. He keeps saying that the passwords you gave him should be sufficient for everything. When we tell him they're not working, he gets angry and tells us to try harder." David Miller was experiencing the classic manager's dilemma. He was responsible for results that required expertise he didn't possess. When faced with technical problems he couldn't solve, his response was to demand that other people solve them through superior effort rather than superior knowledge. "Marcus, perhaps you should suggest that David contact the IT department for additional administrative credentials." "Sarah, you are the IT department. There is no separate IT team for the integration platform. You built it, you maintained it, and you're the only person who knows how to access the advanced functions." "Marcus, I'm no longer a TechFlow employee. I can't provide technical support for systems I don't have authorization to access." "Then what are we supposed to tell the DataCorp team? That we can't demonstrate our own systems because we don't know how to use them?" "Marcus, I think that might be exactly what you need to tell them." I hung up and continued watching the second-floor conference room where the body language was becoming increasingly agitated. I could see someone pacing near the windows, probably David trying to project confidence while internally panicking about the collapse of his carefully planned presentation. At 3:08 p.m., my phone rang with a call from a number I recognized, David Miller's direct line. "Sarah, we need to talk. There seems to be some kind of technical malfunction with the integration platform. The demonstration systems aren't responding to the access credentials you provided." His voice carried the forced calm of someone trying to maintain professional composure while dealing with a crisis he didn't understand. David was still operating under the assumption that this was a technical problem with a technical solution, rather than a management problem with management consequences. "David, I provided you with all the access credentials I was authorized to share. If you're encountering additional security measures, then those must require higher-level authorization than I had access to." "Sarah, you built these systems. How can there be authorization levels that you don't have access to?" "David, as you explained yesterday, well-designed systems should function regardless of personnel changes. If the integration platform requires specific individual authorization, then perhaps that represents a design flaw that should be addressed." I could hear the frustration building in David's voice as he struggled to process what I was telling him. He had fired me because he believed that individual expertise could be replaced by management processes and documentation. Now he was discovering that some expertise couldn't be replaced, only transferred willingly. Sarah, I need you to come back to the office immediately and resolve these access issues. The DataCorp team is here, and we need to complete the scheduled demonstrations. David, as you informed me yesterday, my employment relationship with TechFlow has been terminated. I'm no longer authorized to access company systems or provide technical support. This is an emergency situation, Sarah. I'm authorizing you to provide temporary technical assistance to resolve these access problems. David, I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, but emergency authorization isn't how enterprise security systems work. If you terminated my system access yesterday, then restoring that access requires proper procedures and documentation. I'm sure your IT department can help you with the appropriate protocols. Sarah, you know damn well that there is no separate IT department for these systems. You are the IT department. David was finally stating the truth that he had been avoiding for 18 months. TechFlow's integration platform was entirely dependent on my expertise, and eliminating me had eliminated their ability to operate their most valuable asset. But acknowledging the truth didn't change the reality of the situation he had created. David, if the integration platform requires specific expertise that TechFlow no longer has access to, then perhaps you should explain that to the DataCorp evaluation team. I'm sure they'll understand the technical challenges involved. Sarah, if this audit fails, the acquisition falls apart. If the acquisition falls apart, the company could go under. People will lose their jobs because of what you're doing. David was trying to make me feel responsible for the consequences of his decision. He was arguing that I had an obligation to save TechFlow from the crisis that he had created by firing me. But responsibility flowed from authority, and David had made it very clear that I no longer had any authority within TechFlow. David, I'm not doing anything to TechFlow. I'm simply respecting the employment decision that you made yesterday. If you believed that eliminating my position was in the company's best interest, then you must have considered the implications for situations like this. Sarah, I'm prepared to offer you a generous consulting contract to resolve this situation. Name your price. David, I'm not interested in consulting for TechFlow, but I appreciate the acknowledgement that my expertise has value. Then what do you want? Your job back? A promotion? Equity? Whatever it takes to fix this situation. David was finally offering everything he should have considered before firing me, but he was offering it for the wrong reasons. He wanted to buy my cooperation to save himself from embarrassment, not because he recognized the value of my contributions or regretted his poor decision-making. David, what I want is for you to explain to the DataCorp evaluation team why TechFlow's most experienced integration architect is no longer available to support their technical assessment. I want you to take responsibility for the decision you made and the consequences that followed. Sarah, that would be professional suicide. If I tell them that we fired our chief architect on the day before the audit, they'll walk away from the acquisition immediately. David, they're probably going to walk away anyway. The only question is whether they walk away thinking that TechFlow has temporary technical problems or fundamental competence problems. I hung up and looked at my watch. The technical audit had been in progress for over an hour, and DataCorp's evaluation team had apparently seen enough to understand that TechFlow couldn't demonstrate their own systems. Patricia Wong's earlier phone call had confirmed that they were already questioning TechFlow's technical capabilities. At 3:26 p.m., I watched through the second-floor windows as several figures left the conference room and gathered in the hallway outside. The body language suggested intense discussion, probably DataCorp's team conferring privately about what they had observed during the failed demonstrations. At 3:39 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Sarah, the DataCorp people just asked to speak with David privately. Marcus thinks they're going to end the audit early. At 3:52 p.m., another message from Rachel. They're packing up their equipment. I think the audit is over. I watched through the windows as DataCorp's evaluation team systematically disconnected their laptops and monitors, carefully packing their technical equipment with the methodical precision of people who had completed their assessment and reached their conclusions. Their movements were efficient and professional, without the urgency that would suggest they were planning to return for additional evaluation sessions. At 4:06 p.m., I observed the 6 members of DataCorp's technical team exit TechFlow's building and walk toward their vehicles in the parking lot. Patricia Wong paused at the passenger door of the lead sedan and looked back at TechFlow's building with an expression that I couldn't interpret from across the street, but which seemed to convey disappointment rather than anger. The DataCorp vehicles departed at 4:11 p.m., 2 hours and 54 minutes before the technical audit was scheduled to conclude. In the enterprise acquisition world, ending a critical technical evaluation more than halfway through the scheduled time was equivalent to a vote of no confidence. DataCorp had seen enough to know that TechFlow couldn't deliver on their promises. At 4:19 p.m., my phone rang with another call from Patricia Wong. Ms. Chen, I wanted to thank you for our earlier conversation and let you know that DataCorp has concluded our technical evaluation of TechFlow's integration platform. I hope the evaluation met your expectations, Ms. Wong. Ms. Chen, I'm going to speak candidly because I believe you deserve to understand what happened today. TechFlow's current technical team was unable to demonstrate basic administrative access to the integration platform, much less the sophisticated capabilities that we were expecting to evaluate. When we asked detailed questions about system architecture, we received responses that suggested limited understanding of the underlying technology. Patricia Wong was confirming what I had expected, that David Miller and Marcus Webb had been completely unable to handle a sophisticated technical evaluation. They had proven themselves incompetent to operate the systems that justified DataCorp's interest in acquiring TechFlow. Ms. Wong, I appreciate your candor, though I'm not sure what relevance this has for me personally. Ms. Chen, we've spent considerable time and resources evaluating TechFlow's integration capabilities over the past several months. Our assessment was based on the sophisticated technical architecture that we believed represented TechFlow's core competence. Today we learned that TechFlow apparently no longer has access to the expertise that created that architecture. I see. That does sound like a significant concern for an acquisition evaluation. Ms. Chen, DataCorp is no longer interested in acquiring TechFlow. However, we remain very interested in the integration architecture that you developed, and we would like to discuss the possibility of working with you directly. Patricia Wong was offering me exactly what I had hoped might result from today's disaster: an opportunity to work with a sophisticated organization that understood the value of technical expertise and treated architects as strategic assets rather than replaceable components. Ms. Wong, I would be very interested in discussing opportunities with DataCorp. When would be convenient for you? Would tomorrow morning work for you? I'm staying in the city overnight, and I'd like to explore this opportunity before I return to our headquarters. Tomorrow morning would be perfect. I hung up and looked across the street at TechFlow's building, where David Miller was probably trying to explain to his executives why the most important business meeting in the company's history had ended in complete failure. He had spent 18 months trying to prove that he was more valuable than the woman who had built their most valuable asset. Today he had proven exactly the opposite. The aftermath began immediately. I didn't need to be inside TechFlow's building to know what was happening, because I had witnessed enough corporate crises to understand the predictable sequence of events that followed catastrophic failures. Blame assignment, damage assessment, desperate attempts to salvage the unsalvageable, and eventually acceptance of the consequences. At 4:37 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Sarah, the executives are furious. David is in the CEO's office getting screamed at. Marcus is hiding in the supply closet. I think people are going to get fired." At 4:51 p.m., another message from Rachel. "The CEO wants to call an emergency all-hands meeting. Rumors are spreading that the acquisition fell through because of technical problems. People are panicking about layoffs." At 5:14 p.m., a text from Marcus. "Sarah, David is telling the executives that you sabotaged the integration platform to make him look bad. He's claiming that you installed some kind of kill switch that prevented us from accessing the systems." I paused reading that message, feeling a cold anger settle in my chest. David Miller was now claiming that I had deliberately damaged TechFlow's systems, rather than admitting that he had fired the person who could operate them. He was choosing to portray me as a saboteur, rather than acknowledge his own incompetence. "Marcus, I didn't sabotage anything. I built security protocols to protect critical systems from unauthorized access. If David can't demonstrate the systems, it's because he doesn't have the expertise to access them properly. At 5:28 p.m., Marcus called me directly. Sarah, you need to defend yourself. David is telling everyone that you planted some kind of malicious code in the integration platform that activated when you were fired. He's saying that you deliberately destroyed the acquisition to get revenge. Marcus, what exactly is David claiming that I did? He's saying that you built hidden backdoors into the integration systems that would shut down critical functions if you were terminated. He's calling it corporate sabotage and claiming that you violated your employment agreement by damaging company property. David was constructing a narrative that painted him as the victim of my vindictive actions rather than the architect of his own disaster. He was claiming that the integration platform had failed because of my malicious intent rather than his management incompetence. Marcus, ask David to explain exactly which systems are malfunctioning. Ask him to identify specifically what damage I supposedly caused to the integration platform. What do you mean? Marcus, if I had sabotaged the integration systems, then they wouldn't be working for existing clients, would they? But the integration platform is functioning normally for all current operations. Client data is synchronizing properly, routine maintenance tasks are executing on schedule, and there are no error conditions affecting normal business operations. The only thing that isn't working is David's ability to demonstrate administrative functions that he never had access to in the first place. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing what I had explained. So you're saying that the systems aren't actually broken? Marcus, the systems are working exactly as they were designed to work. They're protecting sensitive administrative functions from unauthorized access. David is calling that sabotage because he doesn't understand the difference between security protocols and malicious code. Sarah, can you prove that? Can you show that the systems are functioning normally except for the access problems? Marcus, the proof is in the operational logs. Every client integration is running normally. Every scheduled task is executing properly. Every security protocol is functioning as designed. The only thing that's the only thing that he could demonstrate systems he doesn't understand using credentials that don't provide the access he needs. At 5:43 p.m., my phone rang with a call from James Morrison, TechFlow's Chief Executive Officer. I had interacted with James periodically over the past 3 years, usually during strategic planning meetings, where my technical expertise was relevant to business decisions. He was a competent executive who understood the importance of technology to TechFlow's competitive position, but he relied on his technical staff to translate complex concepts into business terms. Sarah, I need to understand what happened during today's audit. David is telling me that there were technical malfunctions with the integration platform that prevented successful demonstrations, but the DataCorp team is saying that our technical staff couldn't provide basic access to the systems. I need to know what really happened. James Morrison was asking for the truth because he was getting conflicting accounts from people with different motivations for shaping the narrative. David wanted to blame technical problems beyond his control. DataCorp wanted to explain why they were withdrawing from the acquisition. Neither version was complete. James, I can tell you what I know about the technical situation, but I should mention that David terminated my employment yesterday, so I wasn't present during today's audit. Sarah, David told me that your termination was part of a planned restructuring to reduce dependencies on individual contributors. He said that the timing was coordinated to ensure a smooth transition. James, David fired me at 11:47 a.m. yesterday, 3 hours and 13 minutes before the DataCorp evaluation team was scheduled to arrive for the most important technical audit in TechFlow's history. If that was planned coordination, then David has an unusual definition of smooth transition planning. I heard James take a deep breath on the other end of the line. He was beginning to understand that David's version of events didn't align with basic logical reasoning. Sarah, can you explain why the integration platform couldn't be demonstrated today? David is claiming that you installed some kind of kill switch that activated when you were terminated. James, I didn't install kill switches in the integration platform. I built security protocols to protect administrative functions from unauthorized access. The systems are functioning normally for all client operations, but they require proper authentication for advanced administrative functions like stress testing and performance monitoring. And David doesn't have the proper authentication? James, David has user-level access to the integration platform, which is appropriate for monitoring routine operations. He doesn't have administrative access because he's never needed administrative access for his management responsibilities. Administrative access is typically limited to the technical staff who built and maintain the systems. But you're no longer on the technical staff. That's correct, James. David eliminated my position yesterday, which also eliminated TechFlow's access to the administrative functions that would have been necessary for today's audit. James was quiet for a long moment, probably realizing that David had created an impossible situation by firing the only person who could demonstrate the systems that DataCorp wanted to evaluate. Sarah, is there any way to restore administrative access to the integration platform? Can you provide additional credentials or override the security protocols? James, restoring administrative access would require me to authenticate my continued involvement with TechFlow and authorize the transfer of administrative credentials to current technical staff. But I'm no longer a TechFlow employee, so I don't have authorization to make those changes. Sarah, I'm prepared to offer you immediate reinstatement with full back pay and additional compensation for the inconvenience. Can you restore the administrative access if I reinstate your employment? James Morrison was offering to undo David's decision and restore my position, but he was offering it for the wrong reasons and probably too late to matter. DataCorp had already concluded their evaluation and withdrawn from the acquisition discussions. James, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure that reinstating my employment would resolve the larger issues that led to today's problems. What do you mean? James, the fundamental issue isn't technical access to the integration platform. The fundamental issue is that David Miller fired TechFlow's chief integration architect on the day before a critical technical evaluation because he felt threatened by expertise he couldn't control. That's a management problem, not a technical problem. Sarah, are you saying that David's decision was motivated by personal considerations rather than business considerations? James, I'm saying that David spent 18 months trying to reduce TechFlow's dependence on individual technical expertise, and he succeeded. TechFlow is no longer dependent on my expertise, because TechFlow no longer has access to my expertise. The question is whether that outcome aligns with TechFlow's business objectives. James was quiet again, probably contemplating the implications of what I had explained. David had achieved his goal of eliminating individual dependencies, but he had achieved it by eliminating the individual capabilities that DataCorp wanted to acquire. Sarah, what would it take to repair the relationship with DataCorp? Is the acquisition completely dead, or is there some way to salvage the situation? James, you'd need to ask DataCorp about their intentions, but based on my conversation with Patricia Wong, they've concluded that TechFlow no longer has the technical capabilities that justified their acquisition interest. You spoke with Patricia Wong? She called me this afternoon to discuss the technical evaluation and to explore whether I might be interested in opportunities with DataCorp directly. James Morrison was learning that DataCorp was considering hiring me as an alternative to acquiring TechFlow, which meant that TechFlow's most valuable technical asset was about to walk away with their potential acquire. Sarah, I need to ask directly, are you planning to join DataCorp? James, I'm planning to explore opportunities with organizations that value technical expertise and understand the importance of treating architects as strategic assets rather than replaceable components. I hung up and checked my email to find 17 new messages, mostly from TechFlow colleagues who had heard rumors about the failed audit and wanted to know what had really happened. The story was spreading quickly through the company, with different versions depending on who was telling it and what they wanted people to believe. At 6:23 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Sarah, David just got fired. The CEO terminated him immediately after talking to you. Marcus thinks there are going to be more layoffs because the acquisition is definitely dead. At 6:37 p.m., another message from Rachel. The CEO is calling an emergency all-hands meeting for tomorrow morning. Rumors are that TechFlow might have to shut down if they can't find another buyer quickly. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness reading those messages. David Miller had finally faced the consequences of his incompetence and arrogance. But his poor decisions were now threatening the jobs of people who had nothing to do with his management failures. TechFlow had good people who deserved better leadership than they had received. But David's termination didn't solve the fundamental problem that TechFlow faced. The company had lost both the acquisition that represented their financial future and the technical expertise that had made them acquisition-worthy in the first place. David's removal was justice, but it wasn't salvation. I walked home through the downtown district as the sun set behind the office buildings, passing other technology companies where talented people were building innovative solutions without worrying about whether their managers understood or valued their contributions. The contrast was stark and illuminating. TechFlow's crisis wasn't just about poor decision-making. It was about a corporate culture that treated technical expertise as a commodity, rather than recognizing it as the strategic asset that drove competitive advantage. That evening, I prepared for my meeting with Patricia Wong by reviewing DataCorp's business model, their technology acquisition strategy, and their approach to integration challenges in enterprise environments. This wasn't just a job interview. It was an opportunity to join an organization that understood the value of sophisticated technical architecture and invested in the people who could deliver it. At 8:37 p.m., my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. The caller ID showed a Virginia area code, which could have been a telemarketer, but something made me answer. Sarah Chen speaking. Ms. Chen, this is Jennifer Walsh from TechCrunch. I'm working on a story about today's events at TechFlow, and I was hoping you might be willing to comment on the failed DataCorp acquisition and your departure from the company. A tech journalist had already picked up the story, which meant that TechFlow's disaster was about to become public knowledge in the industry. Failed acquisitions were news, especially when they involved sophisticated technical companies and mysterious circumstances. Ms. Walsh, I'm not sure I'm the right person to comment on TechFlow's business decisions. I'm no longer employed by the company. Ms. Chen, I understand that you were terminated yesterday, the day before the DataCorp technical audit. Multiple sources are telling me that the audit failed because TechFlow's current technical team couldn't demonstrate the integration platform that you built. Is that accurate? Jennifer Walsh had already gathered significant information about the situation, probably from sources inside TechFlow who were trying to make sense of the day's events. The story was developing rapidly, and my involvement was apparently central to the narrative. Ms. Walsh, I can confirm that I was terminated from TechFlow yesterday. Beyond that, I'd prefer not to comment on internal company matters. Ms. Chen, I've also heard that DataCorp is interested in working with you directly, independent of any acquisition discussions with TechFlow. Can you comment on that? Ms. Walsh, I can't discuss ongoing business conversations, but I can say that I'm exploring opportunities with organizations that value technical expertise and understand the strategic importance of integration architecture. Ms. Chen, one more question. Sources are telling me that TechFlow's CEO terminated the engineering director this evening, apparently related to the failed audit. Do you have any comment on that development? David Miller's firing was apparently becoming public knowledge as well, which meant that the story was expanding beyond a simple failed acquisition into a broader narrative about management incompetence and corporate consequences. Ms. Walsh, I'm not in a position to comment on TechFlow's personnel decisions. You'd need to speak with TechFlow directly about any management changes. I hung up and realized that tomorrow's meeting with Patricia Wong was going to take place against the backdrop of public industry attention to TechFlow's crisis. The story would probably be published within 24 hours, which meant that my role in the events would become part of the public record. That didn't concern me. If anything, public attention to the situation would validate the broader lesson about the importance of treating technical expertise strategically rather than casually. Other companies would read about TechFlow's disaster and hopefully learn from David Miller's mistakes. At 9:15 p.m., I received an email from Patricia Wong confirming our meeting time and location for tomorrow morning. She also mentioned that DataCorp's Chief Technology Officer and Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions would be joining our conversation, which suggested that they were taking the possibility of working together very seriously. The email also included a brief technical questionnaire about my experience with enterprise integration challenges, my approach to scalable architecture design, and my thoughts on emerging technologies in the integration space. These weren't interview questions. They were the kinds of technical discussions that happened between peers who respected each other's expertise. I spent the evening preparing thoughtful responses to their questions, not because I was worried about demonstrating my competence, but because I wanted to engage with intelligent technical professionals who understood the complexity and importance of the work I did. After 3 years of trying to explain technical concepts to David Miller, the prospect of working with people who could engage in sophisticated technical discussions was genuinely exciting. At 10:43 p.m., my phone buzzed with a final text from Rachel. "Sarah, the TechCrunch article just went live. David is quoted as saying that you sabotaged the company. You might want to read it." I opened my laptop and found the article. TechFlow acquisition collapses after chief architect termination. The headline alone told the essential story, but the details were even more damaging to TechFlow's reputation than I had expected. Jennifer Walsh had done thorough reporting, interviewing multiple sources and cross-referencing their accounts to construct an accurate narrative of the events. The article described the sophisticated integration platform that had attracted Datacorp's acquisition interest, my role as the primary architect of that platform, David Miller's decision to terminate my employment on the day before the critical technical audit, and the subsequent failure of the audit when TechFlow's remaining technical team couldn't demonstrate their own systems. The article also included quotes from unnamed sources inside TechFlow describing David Miller as threatened by technical expertise he couldn't understand and determined to prove that individual contributors were replaceable. One source was quoted as saying that firing Sarah Chen on acquisition day was like firing the pilot during takeoff. David Miller was quoted defending his decision. Ms. Chen's departure was part of a planned restructuring to reduce dependencies on individual contributors. The technical difficulties during the Datacorp audit were caused by sabotage, not by management decisions. Ms. Chen apparently installed hidden kill switches in our systems that activated when she was terminated. But the article also included technical expert commentary that contradicted David's sabotage claims. A senior systems architect from another company explained that sophisticated enterprise systems typically included security protocols that protected administrative functions from unauthorized access, and that these protocols were standard industry practice rather than malicious sabotage. The article concluded with a brief mention of my upcoming discussions with Datacorp and a quote from Patricia Wong. Datacorp remains interested in the integration architecture that Ms. Chen developed, and we're exploring opportunities to work with exceptional technical talent. Reading the article, I realized that the story had become bigger than just TechFlow's failed acquisition. It had become a cautionary tale about the importance of recognizing and retaining technical expertise, and about the consequences that followed when managers treated architects as replaceable commodities. The story would probably be read by thousands of technology professionals, many of whom had experienced similar situations where non-technical managers had undervalued or misunderstood critical technical capabilities. David Miller's disaster would become a case study in how not to manage technical teams. I closed my laptop and went to bed, feeling more optimistic about my professional future than I had in months. Tomorrow morning, I would meet with Datacorp's leadership team to discuss opportunities with an organization that understood the strategic value of technical architecture. Tomorrow afternoon, I would probably start receiving calls from other companies who had read the TechCrunch article and realized that an experienced integration architect was suddenly available. David Miller had fired me to prove that individual technical expertise didn't matter. Instead, he had proven that it mattered more than anything else. I woke up Wednesday morning to 17 missed calls, 43 unread emails, and a LinkedIn profile that had somehow gained over 300 new connection requests overnight. The TechCrunch article had resonated with the technology community in ways that I hadn't anticipated, sparking conversations about technical leadership, management competence, and the strategic importance of individual expertise in complex technical organizations. My inbox contained job inquiries from companies I had only dreamed of working for. Senior architecture positions at Fortune 500 corporations, consulting opportunities with prestigious technical firms, startup CTO roles with significant equity packages. The contrast with yesterday's termination meeting was surreal and illuminating. David Miller had fired me because he considered me a replaceable commodity. The broader technology industry apparently disagreed. But the most interesting communications weren't the job offers. They were the personal messages from other technical professionals, sharing their own experiences with managers who had undervalued or misunderstood their contributions. Stories about brilliant engineers fired for political reasons, architects eliminated during restructuring initiatives, technical experts replaced with cheaper alternatives who couldn't deliver comparable results. One message stood out from the others. It came from Linda Rodriguez, my former manager who had retired 18 months ago when David Miller took over the engineering organization. "Sarah, I just read the TechCrunch article about yesterday's events. I'm not surprised that David created this disaster, but I'm furious that it happened to you and to TechFlow. You built something extraordinary there, and David never understood what he was managing. I wanted you to know that I've already reached out to 3 former colleagues who are in executive positions at other companies. They all want to speak with you about opportunities. You're going to land somewhere that appreciates what you can do. Call me when you have time to talk. Linda's message reminded me that David Miller's incompetence hadn't emerged overnight. She had recognized his limitations from the beginning and had tried to protect the technical team from his misguided management initiatives. Her retirement had removed a crucial buffer between David's ambitions and the technical realities of complex system architecture. At 9 a.m., I met Patricia Wong and her colleagues at a downtown restaurant that served excellent coffee and provided enough privacy for confidential business discussions. Patricia arrived with Dr. Michael Stevens, DataCorp's Chief Technology Officer, and Rebecca Martinez, their Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions. All 3 were experienced technology executives who understood the complexities of enterprise integration challenges. The conversation began with technical questions about my approach to scalable architecture design, my experience with high-volume data synchronization, and my thoughts on emerging trends in enterprise integration. These weren't interview questions designed to test my competence. They were peer-to-peer discussions between professionals who shared similar technical backgrounds and strategic perspectives. Dr. Stevens was particularly interested in my philosophy about balancing system security with operational flexibility. Sarah, the integration platform you built for TechFlow included sophisticated security protocols that protected administrative functions from unauthorized access. How do you balance the need for security with the practical requirements of system demonstration and evaluation? Dr. Stevens, I believe that security and operational flexibility are complementary rather than competing concerns. Well-designed security protocols should protect systems from unauthorized access while enabling authorized users to demonstrate full capabilities efficiently. The problems that TechFlow experienced yesterday weren't caused by excessive security. They were caused by inadequate technical expertise. Rebecca Martinez asked about my experience with technical team leadership and my approach to knowledge transfer. Sarah, one of the challenges we face in acquisition situations is ensuring that critical technical knowledge can be preserved and transferred effectively. How do you approach documentation and knowledge sharing for complex technical systems? Rebecca, I believe that effective knowledge transfer requires both comprehensive documentation and hands-on mentoring. You can't simply write down everything you know and expect other people to replicate your results. Complex technical expertise develops through experience, experimentation, and deep understanding of system interactions. Effective knowledge transfer takes time and requires genuine commitment from both the teacher and the student. Patricia Wong brought up the obvious question about my interest in joining DataCorp. Sarah, we've been impressed by your technical capabilities and your approach to integration architecture. We're prepared to offer you a senior position with significant autonomy and resources to build integration solutions for our enterprise clients. Would you be interested in exploring that opportunity? Patricia, I'm very interested in working with DataCorp. After yesterday's experience at TechFlow, I'm particularly attracted to organizations that understand the strategic value of technical expertise and invest in the people who can deliver sophisticated solutions. Dr. Stevens leaned forward. Sarah, I want to be direct about something. We've been evaluating integration architecture solutions for over a year, and the platform you built at TechFlow was by far the most sophisticated we encountered. We're not just interested in hiring you to fill a position. We're interested in working with you to define our entire approach to enterprise integration. They were offering me the opportunity to shape DataCorp's integration strategy rather than simply implementing solutions within existing frameworks. It was the kind of strategic technical leadership role that I had hoped to develop at TechFlow before David Miller decided that individual expertise was a liability rather than an asset. Dr. Stevens, that sounds like exactly the kind of challenge I'd be excited to take on. Can you tell me more about DataCorp's current integration capabilities and your vision for future development? The conversation continued for over 2 hours, covering technical architecture, team leadership, strategic planning, and organizational culture. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined the framework for a senior technical position that would give me the authority and resources to build something even more sophisticated than what I had created at TechFlow. Patricia Wong concluded the discussion with specific next steps. Sarah, we'd like to move quickly on this opportunity. We can have a formal offer prepared by Friday, and we'd be prepared to accommodate any timing requirements you might have. We understand that you're probably receiving other inquiries as well. Patricia, I appreciate DataCorp's confidence in my abilities and your willingness to move quickly. I'm definitely interested in moving forward with this opportunity. As we left the restaurant, Rebecca Martinez mentioned something that provided additional context for their interest. Sarah, I should tell you that we've been tracking your work at TechFlow for over 6 months. The integration platform you built was the primary reason we initiated acquisition discussions with them. When we learned yesterday that you were no longer with the company, we immediately shifted our focus to working with you directly. DataCorp had been acquiring TechFlow to get access to my work, and when David Miller eliminated me from TechFlow, DataCorp had simply decided to acquire me directly instead. David's attempt to prove that individual expertise didn't matter had actually proven that it mattered enough for a Fortune 500 company to restructure their entire acquisition strategy around a single architect. I walked back to my apartment feeling more professionally validated than I had in years. The conversation with DataCorp's leadership had reminded me what it felt like to work with people who understood technical complexity and respected the expertise required to solve sophisticated problems. After 18 months of trying to explain integration concepts to David Miller, the prospect of collaborating with Dr. Stevens and his team was genuinely exciting. That afternoon, I received a call from James Morrison, TechFlow's CEO. Sarah, I wanted to update you on the situation here and see if there's any possibility of repairing our relationship with DataCorp. I know I asked about this yesterday, but I'm hoping you might reconsider. James, I appreciate you calling, but I think the relationship with DataCorp has moved beyond repair. They've concluded that TechFlow doesn't have the technical capabilities they were looking to acquire. Sarah, what if we could demonstrate that we've learned from yesterday's mistakes? What if we rebuilt the technical team with proper expertise and gave you the authority you need to operate effectively? James Morrison was offering to restructure TechFlow's entire technical organization around my requirements, but the offer was coming too late and for the wrong reasons. He was trying to save a failed acquisition rather than acknowledging the fundamental management problems that had created the crisis. James, the issue isn't just about technical team structure. The issue is about organizational culture and strategic priorities. TechFlow hired David Miller because the executives wanted someone who could translate technical work into business language. What they really needed was executives who could understand technical work well enough that translation wasn't necessary. Sarah, are you saying that TechFlow's executive team doesn't have the technical background to manage a technology company effectively? James, I'm saying that successful technology companies are led by people who understand that technical excellence drives business success, not the other way around. David Miller was hired to manage technical people, but he spent 18 months trying to prove that technical expertise wasn't important. That fundamental misunderstanding about the relationship between technical capabilities and business results is what created yesterday's disaster. James was quiet for a moment. Sarah, if we could address those cultural issues, would you consider returning to TechFlow in a senior technical leadership role? James, I'm grateful for everything I learned at TechFlow, but I'm ready to work with an organization that already understands the strategic value of technical expertise. I don't want to spend the next 2 years rebuilding something that should never have been broken in the first place. I hung up and realized that TechFlow's crisis was going to continue long after my departure. They had lost their primary technical asset, their acquisition opportunity, and their reputation for technical competence. Recovery would require not just new technical leadership, but fundamental changes in how the organization understood and valued technical expertise. The broader technology industry was apparently learning from TechFlow's mistakes. My LinkedIn inbox contained messages from executive recruiters, startup founders, and technology leaders who had read the TechCrunch article and recognized the importance of treating technical expertise strategically. David Miller's disaster was becoming a cautionary tale that would influence how other organizations approached technical team management. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Emma, my daughter at UC Davis. Mom, you're famous. The TechCrunch article has been shared in all my business classes. Everyone's talking about how that manager guy totally destroyed his company by firing the wrong person at the wrong time. Emma, I wouldn't say I'm famous. I'm just someone who got caught up in a management disaster that turned out to be educational for other people. Mom, you're being too modest. My professors are using your story as a case study in organizational behavior and strategic human resource management. They're saying that your situation demonstrates the importance of recognizing and retaining key technical talent. Emma's perspective reminded me that the story was resonating beyond the technology industry. Business schools were apparently using TechFlow's crisis as an example of management failure and strategic misalignment. David Miller's attempt to prove that individual expertise didn't matter was becoming a textbook example of how it did. Emma, I hope people learn from what happened. Too many talented technical professionals have been undervalued or misunderstood by managers who don't recognize the complexity of what they do. Mom, I think people are definitely learning. My organizational psychology professor said that your story shows why technical leadership requires technical understanding, not just management skills. After hanging up with Emma, I sat on my balcony overlooking the river and reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred in less than 48 hours. Monday morning, I had been an undervalued technical employee, working for an incompetent manager who treated my expertise as a threat to his authority. Wednesday evening, I was a sought-after technical leader with opportunities to shape integration strategy at one of the most respected technology companies in the industry. David Miller had fired me to prove that individual technical expertise could be replaced by management processes and documentation. Instead, he had proven that some expertise was so valuable that Fortune 500 companies would restructure their acquisition strategies to access it directly. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.